Welcome to another episode of Web3 Unfiltered. This is a podcast where we go beyond the headlines to examine the systems, incentives, and infrastructure shaping decentralized technologies. I am your host, Collins Victory Odabi. One of the biggest assumptions in Web3 is that ownership has already been solved. If an asset sits on chain, secured by a private key and outside the traditional banking system, then many people believe it's fully protected. But ownership in actual sense is about more than access. It's also about enforceability. And enforceability does not happen on a blockchain. It happens within legal systems. So the real question isn't whether you control the assets, it's whether that control holds up when legal disputes, liabilities, and real-world enforcement enter the picture. As digital wealth expands across crypto wallets, businesses, real estate, and multiple jurisdictions, understanding how legal structures interact with blockchain becomes increasingly important. Now, joining me today for this conversation is Ted Sutton. He is a partner and asset protection attorney at Corporate Direct. Ted works with entrepreneurs, investors, and digital asset holders to build legal structures that protect wealth across traditional and emerging financial systems. His work sits at the point where blockchain technology meets legal reality, making him the perfect guest for today's conversation. Ted, welcome to Web3 Unfiltered. How are you doing today? It's great to have you here.
Collins, I'm doing well. It's great to be on.
It's great to have you on the show, Ted. So before we dive into today's discussion, I'd like our listeners to get to know you a little better. You've taken a rather interesting route in law, so tell us about that journey. What led you to becoming an asset protection attorney?
Definitely. So many of you might know my father, Garrett Sutton. He's been associated with Robert Kiyosaki in the Rich Dad series, and he's written 8 books in the Rich Dad series. You know, if he were here, he would make me hold up his book. But, you know, it's strictly audio, which is kind of a relief because I don't have to do that. But I grew up in Reno, Nevada, where obviously I live with my parents. And my dad started Corporate Direct, which is a business that sets up businesses for other people and helps people protect their assets. So he did that. I grew up with him. I'm from Reno. I went to the University of Utah for my undergrad. I got a degree in mining engineering of all things. But the summer before I graduated, I worked at a mine in northern Chile. And it's in the Atacama Desert, the driest place on earth. Now, while I did have fun doing that, it made me realize I didn't want to make a career in the mining industry. Just because you work long hours, you work remotely, it definitely wears on you. So after I graduated, I remember my parents sat me down and my dad says, "Look, Ted, you know, you're not finding work. You don't like this line of work. What do you say that, you know, you go to law school, you take the bar exam, and then you take over my practice?" And I'm like, you know what? I think that sounds like a good idea. Just because I'd been around Robert before, you know, I have some familiarity with what my dad did. And from that moment forward, I never looked back. I took a year off, went to law school at the University of Wyoming, and now I'm licensed to practice law in Nevada, Wyoming, and Texas. And, you know, the plan is to take over the practice over the next few years. You know, it's been good. I've been specializing in business law, asset protection, and all the permutations that come with it. And so one of them relates to the crypto space, just because crypto's taken off in the past few years. And, you know, like you said, I think people think that if they hold title to assets in a private key, they're protected. The answer is they're not, just because, you know, those assets are still in their individual name. So it's important to have LLCs in place. You know, they're used to protect stocks, but they could also be used to protect crypto too.
I think it's interesting that your path into law eventually placed you right alongside one of the fastest evolving areas of finance. As digital assets have grown, you found yourself applying long established legal principles to an entirely new type of property. And that brings us to something I think many people misunderstand. In Web3, ownership is often reduced to one simple idea that if you control the private keys, you own the assets, not your keys, not your coin. There's a way they say it. Technically, that's true in many situations, but legally, the picture is far more complicated. So, how do you define ownership from a legal perspective, particularly when we're talking about digital assets?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, ownership relates to legal title over who actually owns certain assets. If you set up like a personal brokerage account, the assets in those brokerage account in the brokerage account are owned by you. But if you set up a legal entity, if you set up a business brokerage account to hold title to your assets, then legally they're held in that entity. And so I think there's a big distinction there. Assets being held in your individual name and assets being held in an entity. And, when it comes to the Web3 space, the legal space is going to take a while to catch up. I think blockchain will be really good when it comes to title transfers and things of that nature. But when it comes to the court system and enforcing judgments, it'll take a little while to get there. But the fact of the matter is, if you hold title to assets in your individual name and not in an entity, they're going to be much easier to reach, regardless of whether they're on the blockchain or not.
Ted, one of the things that stands out from your answer is the distinction between controlling an asset and legally protecting it. Those aren't always the same thing, and I suspect that's where many crypto holders become overconfident. So, where do you see the biggest disconnect between how people in crypto think about ownership and how the law actually treats it?
Yeah, well, I think there's some crypto people out there who kind of view things as the wild, wild west, and they kind of do whatever they want. I think it, like I said, I think the law is going to take a while to catch up. I've noticed that a lot of people get into the crypto space just because, I think in a lot of ways the system in place isn't working, and I think, with that, there's just a lot of changes that have yet to come. And so I think, with crypto, there's some people who are doing it for the right reasons, but I think there's some other people who are just kind of like, I want to do whatever I want. And the laws don't apply to them. However, that's still not the case. Just because, if you have a judgment against you personally, a court can still reach those assets. So, I don't know. I think it's really interesting. I think it is the wild, wild west right now. I think people think that they could get away with things when in reality they can't.
Wow, Ted, that highlights an important point. Removing intermediaries does not mean removing legal responsibility. It simply changes where responsibility sits. Technology may change how assets are held, but it does not remove the legal framework surrounding them. Now, with that in mind, many people treat assets protection as something to think about later once they've accumulated meaningful wealth. But from what you're describing, that seems like the wrong way around. At what stage should founders and investors begin thinking seriously about assets protection, particularly those building wealth through crypto?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Collins. The analogy I like using is when you're building a house. The asset protection comes from the legal entity, and the legal entity is the foundation for your investment journey. When you have the house is the analogy to show your net worth and your financial well-being, and the first thing you need to have in place is that legal entity to protect all those financial assets. And so there's some people who get careless, they don't think they need the protection. But with that attitude, bad things happen when you least expect them. And if you have a personal judgment against you, those personal assets are within reach. And so, it's kind of like if you have a house with a shaky foundation, you're going to be in trouble. But if you lay that foundation first, where you set up the legal entity from the beginning, you're going to have much better asset protection moving forward. So I think you start with asset protection right at the beginning, and then when you have that entity structure in place, it'll be that strong foundation that'll withstand any legal challenges in the future.
I like the analogy you used about building a house. If the foundation isn't there from the beginning, everything built on top of it becomes vulnerable. Now, let's make it practical. Let's make that practical. When someone is holding digital assets today, what legal structures actually provide meaningful protection, and where do people most often get it wrong?
Yeah, so I think the easiest place to start is with an LLC. If you have digital assets, we like using a Wyoming LLC for that. Wyoming offers numerous benefits. The first is that Wyoming LLCs are very affordable. They're only $100 to set up, and the annual filing fees are $62 a year, every year thereafter. The second thing is that Wyoming LLCs offer privacy because they do not require members or managers to list their name on the Wyoming Secretary of State's website. There are a lot of other states out there that require a member or a manager to list their name, but Wyoming doesn't. And I know in the crypto space, there's a lot of people in the space who value privacy. And so having a Wyoming LLC there is really key. And then the third thing is the charging order protection that Wyoming LLCs offer when somebody is personally sued. So, if there's somebody in crypto who's involved in a lawsuit, or they get into a car accident, or they deal with any litigation, going into court, it's really a coin toss as to whether you win or lose. And if you're on the losing side, the winner could get a judgment against you, and with that judgment, they'll try to collect from your personal assets. And if your entity or if your assets are held in a Wyoming LLC, they can only get a charging order. And what that is it's a lien on the distributions from the LLC, if any are made. And the benefit there is that with the Wyoming LLC, you have the control whether or not those distributions are made. And so if you don't take anything out of the Wyoming LLC, that creditor has to sit there and wait. And there's a lot of other states that don't have that benefit where you have the control whether or not distributions are made. There's states like California, New York, Utah, Minnesota, all these other places that don't have the charging order protection, but Wyoming does. So if you're a crypto investor and you want to hold title to your crypto investments, I recommend setting up a Wyoming LLC.
What's interesting is that everything you've described still relies on traditional legal systems. The blockchain may record ownership, but when disputes arise, it's ultimately the courts and legal institutions that determine how those rights are enforced. That raises a broader question about decentralization itself. Web3 was built around reducing reliance on central authorities and giving individuals greater control over their assets. But legal systems still operate through jurisdiction, through legislation and enforcement. So, do decentralized technologies meaningfully change asset protection, or do legal systems still determine the outcome when it matters most?
Yeah, Collins, I think that's a really good question. At the end of the day, just because of the legal system we have, the legal system will always dominate the outcomes. I think with the decentralized system with Web3, it really is the wild, wild west where there's not a lot of regulations. But the legal system at the end of the day will ultimately trump everything. I don't think you're going to have your own separate American judicial system along with a separate Web3 system. I think the judicial system will have jurisdiction over Web3. I think it'll take a while to develop, And I think in some ways it could actually be really beneficial, especially with blockchain and title transfers and things of that nature. But yeah, it's going to take a while to get there because the legal system is not, they're not as technologically advanced as people would think. I think they'll catch up a little bit with AI, but I think eventually there will be more of a framework that the legal system will have over Web3 in the future. So there's going to be no way that Web3 is going to circumvent, the current legal system we have in place.
Well, if legal systems remain the final layer of enforcement, then perhaps the most interesting question isn't whether governments have influence, but how they are choosing to exercise it as digital assets become more mainstream. From your perspective, Ted, where are you currently seeing governments and legal systems asserting that control over crypto assets?
Yeah, well, I haven't really seen too much of that. I know that the Trump administration has been very pro-crypto. I'm not horribly familiar with what other countries are doing, but it seems like things were more tense under the Biden administration. They were a little bit more hands-on the crypto industry. And with Trump, he seems to be more hands-off. And I know that Donald Trump Jr. is in the crypto space. They had, I think they have a Trump coin. So I think the laws will get liberalized a little bit. But I think we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. I'm very bad at making predictions. But I think crypto will become more and more ubiquitous because of the laws that are going to be put in place. And, I think a lot of people just feel like the system isn't working. And because of that, they're dumping assets into crypto. So I think eventually it will grow. But, I don't know specifically what's going to happen in each country. But what I can say is that it'll probably be more common in the U.S. in the future.
It is clear enough that regulation is evolving, but another force is reshaping the legal profession at the same time, and that is artificial intelligence. AI is already being used today to draft documents, review contracts, and support legal research. Those capabilities bring obvious efficiencies, but they also introduce new risks if people begin relying on AI without understanding its limitations. And I think we're seeing a lot of that happening today. From what you've seen, Ted, how is AI changing legal services, particularly in areas like compliance and asset protection?
Definitely. Well, I think AI in the legal field has been pretty negative in the last few months, or, over the last few years too. Just because there's people out there that have used ChatGPT to cite case law, and, when they ask for case law, ChatGPT hallucinates and comes back with fake case law. And with that, they take the fake case law into court in a court-filed document, and then the judge reprimands the attorney because they did that search. It generated a fake case. So, that's pretty negative. And then I think another thing is that people are using ChatGPT as their lawyer. There was a recent case in Illinois where this lady reopened a lawsuit against an insurance company. They entered into a settlement agreement a year before, and she used ChatGPT to draft several dozen motions without any attorney oversight. And it is so bad, and it's really hurt the judicial system just because ChatGPT is not licensed to practice law. And on top of that, it's incapable of exercising professional judgment. So, in the legal space generally, it's been really bad because it cites fake case law, and people are using AI as a substitute for their attorneys, which ends up causing more problems. Now, when it comes to asset protection, it's not as negative just because you can use AI as a contract drafting tool. But you also need to be really careful too, because I've seen people who just blindly plug stuff into AI, no human oversight, and they end up drafting a contract that doesn't reflect their wishes. So in that sense, it's really negative. I think people are using AI and Chat GPT and all these other softwares as their brain, when in reality, it's a tool. I tell people that AI is a tool, it's not your brain. If you use it to draft contracts, you need to have human oversight, and that human being needs to have the final say of whether or not that contract is good. And, people have kind of abdicated that, and, it's just caused a bunch of problems. But I think in the long run, if you use AI, if you incorporate it into like Microsoft Word to draft a document to sort of speed up that process, it could be good. But when you do that, you need to have a human being that oversees everything and has the final say. And so it's really concerning because you see a lot of these companies that have laid off people because they're channeling their resources into AI. I think, they're doing it to save money, which I understand, but the customer service and the quality is going to go down. And I think people need to be very mindful of that. If you have AI, you need to have, you still need to employ people, and the human being needs to sign off on whatever the AI helps you draft. And so I think overall, legally, it's very much a net negative. But if you use it correctly, in very limited circumstances, it could be good, but it has to involve a human.
What I take from that is that AI works best as an assistant, not as a replacement for professional judgment. The technology can accelerate legal work, yeah, but it can't replace accountability, and that's a distinction many people are still learning. Now, looking beyond AI, the risk landscape itself is changing. It's no longer about lawsuits or creditors. Digital asset holders now have to think about data exposure, cross-border regulation, identity, and an increasingly connected financial system. With all that in mind, what do you think are the biggest risks that digital asset holders are still underestimating today?
So I think they underestimate the reach of the law. I think there's some people who I've noticed they use things in private key. They use private keys to hold title to their assets. I think they enter the space thinking that they're free of the legal system, when in reality it's not the case. So I think they underestimate that risk. Another thing is that there's other countries out there that could pass laws that crack down on crypto and other digital assets. So I think those are probably the two big ones. But again, I think overall, crypto will become a bigger thing than what it is. So, I think at the end of the day, we'll just have to see.
That ties into something we are seeing more broadly. As confidence in parts of the traditional financial system shifts, more investors are exploring alternative assets, whether that's cryptocurrency, precious metals, or other stores of value. But changing the assets does not necessarily remove risk. It often changes that form, or the form that risk takes. So, from an asset protection perspective, Ted, why are more investors moving towards alternative assets, and does that actually make them any safer?
Yeah, well, I think people are moving to alternative assets just because the more traditional assets aren't as good as what they once were. I think especially with real estate investing, in 2020, prices were half of what they are now, and you're paying a 3% interest rate on any mortgage. But now, prices have doubled and you're paying 6 or 7% on a mortgage. So I think that's one reason. Another thing is that I think, there is a K-shaped economy where people are getting wealthier and other people are struggling. And so I think as sort of a hedge against that, they're just putting their chips on the table and investing in alternative assets. But when it comes to asset protection, the principle is the same, whether you hold title to real estate or stocks, or whether you hold title to alternative assets. You need to have an LLC in place that's the foundation to your home, that will protect you when any claims arise in the future. So, Having that LLC in place, laying that foundation for your financial future to get your financial house in order is really, really key. And this is true whether or not you hold traditional assets or alternative assets.
One idea has come up repeatedly throughout this conversation. It's that building wealth and protecting wealth are two different disciplines. Success in one does not automatically guarantee success in the other. So, Ted, as we wrap up, if someone is building wealth today, what are the biggest mistakes they should avoid when it comes to protecting it?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest one is just assembling a team of people who can help you. When you build wealth, it really is a team sport. It's important to have an attorney in place to protect your assets, set up the structures so they're protected. It's important to have an accountant who can help you with all the tax matters. If you invest in real estate, it's important to have property managers and lenders and all that. I think with crypto, it seems like a lot of people have a team of people they can rely on to invest in whatever assets they choose. And, another thing is I know financial advisors are slowly starting to get into the crypto space. So I think that's the big thing, is just assembling a team of people who can help. And then, another one is just underestimating the risks that people face. There's a lot of people that hold title to assets in their individual name. However, we live in such a litigious society that a claim could come up at any time. And so it's important to have that LLC in place so your personal assets are going to be out of reach in the event you were to lose in court.
Ted, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your insights with us today. Before we wrap up the episode, where can listeners learn more about your work and connect with you? Do you have any final notes for us?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing is whether you invest in traditional assets or alternative assets, it's important to have an asset protection plan in place with a Wyoming LLC. And if you need help setting it up, my team at Corporate Direct would be happy to assist you. You can schedule a free 15-minute consultation on our website at corporatedirect.com, where you can talk to a knowledgeable human being who can help you with the setup process. But on top of that, we have a lot of other resources too. We have a lot of articles, and I also post YouTube videos and content on Instagram and TikTok at least once a week. And so, make sure to check that out as well. And, we look forward to helping people be a stepping stone on their journey to financial freedom.
Amazing. One of the biggest takeaways from this conversation is that ownership isn't determined solely by technology. Blockchain can establish control, yeah, but when legal, financial, and regulatory pressure appears, the structures surrounding that asset often become just as important as the technology itself. So here's a big thank you to Ted Sutton for joining us and helping unpack the legal realities behind digital asset ownership and protection. If you'd like to learn more about Ted's work, you'll find relevant links in the episode description and show notes. Thank you for listening to this episode of Web3 Unfiltered. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and keep building.